pleasure to be here. I have a lot of material to back up what I'm saying because I'm not used now for a long time to explain myself in English, and especially all these medical terms that are behind it. It's all backed up in an article I'm sending to Jason, and hopefully it gets distributed to everyone. The basic mission why I'm here is that I was working through the problems of trivialization in the way that Heinz von Förster understands it, that we or Humberto Maturana would understand it, that when we focus on something, we generate a space around it which is unfocused, which is uncontrollable. And in trivializing ourselves, in maximizing our efficiency in the interaction with the machine, there's a certain decline of communication, of relationship, and this is the topic I called in today, in movement. And this lack of movement or lack of physical activity is normally always seen as something positive. Oh yes, we can't have a Zoom meeting, and nobody has to get out of his house. That's something wonderful. But of course, as cyberneticians, and that's why I called it a steering problem, our blood circulation and our cell circulation is what is rebuilding in an autobraces this whole system, and it's made for running between 10 and 11 kilometers a day.
I'm losing your voice. Lucas.
Toxins. And so what is happening is we don't have the right nutrition. We have a lot of stress also from the pollution that is coming in. And so we want to just focus that we get our work done. And then we think, oh, digitalization, we sit on the computer, whatever you do, you sit on the computer. But what is happening is that your body is falling apart. And there is the indication that even before COVID, the World Health Organization called out for an emergency because they calculated that every fourth adult person is actually dying from the lack of movement. They calculated this by referencing people who survive cancer, who survive diabetes, who survive a heart attack, against who doesn't survive, comparing those who move and those who don't move. And they ask that we have to change this, but of course, the movement goes in the opposite direction. That means we make less and less activity, and we blame, of course, the problems that arise. We blame it on something else, on something particular. We say, oh, there's too much sugar, but we don't ask, what is the steering problem? Is the steering problem is that the sugar is a substitute for movement, like coffee is a substitute for movement. And so in order to stay in front of the computer, bless you, yes, we have to drink, we have to consume like internal movement to stay awake. But in the long run, this kills our brain, and it also kills our communication and relationships. And we don't notice it normally out of this vicious cycle, because as we increase productivity, those who ignore their relationships and everything else the most, they get the best awards, and we say, oh, Professor so-and-so, you're a really good example for humanity. You made so many good inventions, blah, 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 blah. But and with this, the connections which are lost, and this is, I think this can be shown in the brain. There's a wonderful book there. It's called Spark, What Exercise Can it shows that when we introduce movement again, that when we introduce movement again, that in learning, depression, social disorders, HDD, attention deficit disorder, all these fields can be re-regulated. Because why? Because movement is like the basic motor for inventing our reality. And if we move a lot and have a lot of discipline in movement, this is where I want to switch over to the positive part. Like, for example, in Qigong, I'm now doing for 20 years Qigong and Tai Chi teaching. Yes, this is my favorite position, because the body, what is different, like left and right, comes together as one. This is the meaning. What seems to be different is one, and it comes together in front of the heart, which means by heart I know we look different, but we really are one. And so it is like the oneness of body and mind is something that, if we want to survive and steer digitalization, we have to, in the ancient Chinese way, notice how our lack of movement, our movement, how it creates anger, how it creates sadness, how it gets all these vicious circles, which in communication destroy our relationship. And we should really implement movement, especially mindful movement and movement meditation, in order to give the body and the mind enough spaces in between whatever we think that we really need to do to regenerate ourselves. I want to introduce a second book that is Spark in the Machine: How the Science of Acupuncture Explains the Mysteries of Western Medicine, which explains the computer makeup of our body, from being a singular cell into becoming a body, which keeps in growing our body. There are the meridian systems which relate also to our emotions, and in order to communicate, none of our meridian systems, of our organ systems, must be like possessed by the emotions. Like when you, for example, when you drink a lot of coffee, as you noticed, I also drank coffee before I did this talk. Then we want to push the liver. The liver is like the general in Chinese medicine, in order to make good decisions. But when you drink too much coffee, then you talk too fast, like I'm doing now, and you want to push too many good decisions onto your listeners. And then the mind, the general, says, oh, yes, I know what he's talking, but it cannot go to the heart. So this understanding of body and mind as a cybernetic unity, which creates reality on the outside, but also our inner structure through the communication of our organs via the emotions they release in our mind and change our interpretations. I think this is vital now for our survival as humanity, because when we are, for example, in anger emotions all the time, because of the overstress we give ourselves, because we don't have the movement, we don't have the clarity, and we make these constant decisions which are always going in one direction. You see it in Facebook, which also uses the algorithms, that the more anger the people display, the more they click, and the longer they stay on Facebook, and they say, hooray, effectivity, trivialization, it works. But really what happens, we get more and more angry people, and then they start having a riot or starting really to fight against each other, because cybernetically they have to release our anger. So we have to do different movement. We have to have the right diet. And we have to inspect from this movement how the movement we do and the meditation we do affects how we use our emotions, or which role our emotions have in our daily judgment and in our daily communications. And I think it's vital, and the World Health Organization also thinks it's vital, as it shows not only that every fourth adult is dying statistically from the lack of movement, is dying early, but what is more dramatic is that from children from 11 to 18 years old, 80% are affected to become one of these four adults. And we have already these problems that the spine doesn't properly develop, that mental problems develop very early because you don't have the movement and you don't have the interaction that the child should have. But because we think that we're like a computer, already have the fixed hardware, but we don't think cybernetically that this hardware is an autopoietic hardware, which needs the movement and which needs the calm, this calm state of mind in order to develop properly and not degenerate. And this is something that it is ignored. And I think Heinz von Förster, in his paper, The Future of Perception and Perception of the Future, has put on point that this is a problem of trivialization. Everything I've described now, or tried to describe, is a problem of trivialization. Yes?
Lucas, can you raise your camera a little bit because it's cutting
oh yes,
your head. Okay, good, thank you.
So far, as I can see, everything I've described or tried to describe to you is a problem of trivialization, of getting addicted to becoming more effective in our acting with our machines for production of certain things. But we forget that we destroy the environment. And it's, for me, this trivialization, it's the ecocide that we are all concerned about in the outside. It is the ecocide of the environment that is most us, our body. The lack of movement, the poisoning, and the stress that we push into our bodies as we getting more and more powerful with our machines, and we can replace even our shoulders and our hips and every organ to continue doing this. But my point is, we are cyberneticians. We have to see that this way of how we steer goes into the wrong direction, and somehow we have to communicate it and to change it. And this a little bit, I hoped I could help with producing the articles, and a little bit I hope I can help whenever you're invited to do also some Qigong movement together, maybe a practical session. But for now, for the start, I think it is really important that one knows this central context, why we move and what has to happen. And this is why I started with this big introduction. Thank you very much for enduring it and listening.
Good. You have all of the time because the other speakers seems not showing up. So what do you want to do? And the questions from gentlemen?
Well, I'm here, Jason. I have a session as well. But
oh, you are here. Sorry, I didn't see your name there. Okay, so if no questions for Lucas, let's listen to you. Do?
Hello, welcome.
If I could interject a question here,
yes,
I
please,
would.
Please, let's do so.
Okay, so your talk, your use of language is highly metaphoric.
Yes.
And within this, these numerous metaphors, I have a very difficult time finding a logical connection that conjoins the concepts. Do you have any general thoughts about how these concepts of triviality are conjoined to one another?
Of two realities. Sorry, what was the last part of the question?
How are these various concepts of triviality conjunctive in a logical sense to one another, such that one can have a clear path, such that one can have a clear path between the antecedents of triviality and the conclusion that this is important for health?
I think it's a simple, or the simple main idea is that movement is the motor of building up our autopoietic system as a body, and these different parts of what you say metaphorical, these different consequences of movement being the motor, but really not only metaphorically, but really the movement is the way that the body transports the cell fluid, that everything is happening. And if all these things are not happening, then all these different ways of degenerative circles start to happen. And you can look out in the different fields for the different explanations, and there are the studies which are also put into the article. But this seeing it connected as us wanting to be more productive, and because of we are becoming more productive, we reduce our movement, but without the reduction of our movement, the body starts to decay. And our over creativity of trying to adapt to this decaying or degeneration of the body creates a cycle of more and more reactions. But I think the main thing is, for building up our cybernetic system, which creates our reality internally and externally, movement is the motor, and we have to invent a daily practice of movement and interaction that sustains us as cybernetic systems, or society falls apart. Because when we now say it's a nuclear war that ends us, in the end, the nuclear war that ends for problems of communication and steering. This is why, for me, it's important to see this not only as a metaphor, but this metaphorical net is all connected. We have to steer our bodies and minds in a way to sustain this cybernetic equilibrium, yeah, or balances. Oh, that's an easier word. Thank you.
Would it be fair to say then that your efforts somehow connect vicious circles with virtuous circles?
Yes, this is also perfect of how we see in Chinese medicine the difference between what is healthy and what is sick. The sickness is a degeneration of the healthy circles, and the healthy circles, the opposite. Yeah. If I see you shouting and I say, please don't shout, I make it worse. But when I say, oh, I can hear you very well, I feel you're very angry, oof, then the shouting disappears. So I know Chinese medicine is also always understood as metaphorical, but it is not metaphorical. It is also very physical. This is why I refer to two ways how we direct it, our cybernetical system. One is the nervous system, that is of course, brain and nervous system. And the second is the system of the cell flow. It's the static electricity, which refeeds the cells And it's how we are born from a single cell. We develop and split up. And through this growing process, all these related cells, all in system, they all, one is liver system of stomach, spleen. And so if I have these emotional problems or vicious circles, it's not only metaphorical. If I get really angry all the time, I will die with a liver problem. There's no metaphor in this. You're really dead. Sorry, you have been angry too often.
Let me build on
The
Jerry's
balance.
Let me build on Jerry's demarcation between vicious and virtuous interactions.
Yes.
Science has been
Please.
described as the measure of movement. You poke the rat with your jab of this and it dies or it cures cancer. You're literally taking what's the state of a black box and probing how it moves. It's
Yes,
always from
yes.
the outside. Is what you're saying, Lucas, that a cybernetic understanding is not just the bits and bytes of the measure of movement, but the measure of measurement? And by that, I mean the most important symbol in the universe is the equal sign.
Yes,
What
yes.
happens on one side of an equation has another side over on this side of the equation. It may take a while, but is that the
Yes.
distinction you're making? The science Western measure of movement, you probe, you learn a hell of a lot when you do
Yes.
that. Over here, you're taking a different epistemology that
Yes.
allows one to say, it's not about this object, it's about a relationship structure.
Yes. Yes, exactly. It's about.
I like your
Please.
I like your explanation of this, like the difference coming into one.
Yes.
But
Yes.
the original theory behind that is that we have those chi special. I even don't have an English word for that. It's something you have acupuncture point here and here, and this action is to connect the two. So by doing that connection, your chi flow around much better, and that
Yes.
can be practiced. And so that is a different story. And we use a lot of metaphors of this kind. For example, during the communication, we run into difficulties, and we remember there are 5 different kinds of gaps. So the first one will be the character. The different people have different characteristics. So you have different character, and he has a different character. So there's a gap. And second one, finger pointing finger, representing your perspective, the vision. So you're pointing at somewhere. Hands from first likes to use a little hand finger
Yes.
to make a point. So this representing the perspective and where you're pointing at is different. So the third one is a bad sign. This one, right? Is representing culture, because in Western culture this is no good.
Yes.
But in other cultures, this might be good because it's the tallest figure of the O. So this might represent something different. So reminder of a cultural difference. And this one representing self-interest, because it's something you always want to hide. This finger has a tendency to hide itself. So it's representing self-interest. And the last one is your standing point. Is you take positions here and there. And it can be easily changed because it's not that important. The period 5 are more important. So we do use a lot of hand gestures, and in Buddhism, you got a lot of communication going on in the Buddhist hand gesture. But I have a question for you.
Yes.
Relationship of the motor versus the total health of the body, of the quality.
Yes.
The case is Stephen Hawking. How do you explain? He's not moving. He's just moving a little bit, but still contribute greatly.
Yes.
It's how do you explain that?
Yes. Yes, of course. This is really wonderful because this also shows I even used it in teaching. When I was teaching about neurogenesis, I used Stephen Hawking as an example. Because when Stephen Hawking, this is what Heinz von Förster Maturana mean by saying language and thought are internal, the connection between external movement and internal movement. And when you look at Stephen Hawking, when he was a kid, you could already see his genius. He would be climbing on trees all the time. When he read the autobiography with the mother, he fell every day, he fell at least one time off a tree because he was always up. And so he was really crazy in movement, but when his disease started, all this creativity of movement was transformed into internal movement. And this internal movement of his brain and what it does to his body kept his body alive for many, many, many more years than anyone in the scientific community, in the medical community could ever predict. He was already dead for decades now. But because he had this internalized movement at such a genius level, he could continue his circulations. And this is what I think, what also prevents us from noticing the problem I was talking about in time. Because of course, our attention systems are so well, and with this, if our ingenuity mixed with our technology only makes us noticing the problem when it's like game over. Because we always find a new way out, but this new way out always creates a bigger problem. It's a vicious cycle.
I agree. Actually, my own explanation for the phenomena of Qigong is that it's actually an internal massage by your brain directing that massage to your neural system. So that mysterious Qigong practice is actually a guided and deliberate internal movement.
Yes.
Giving your nerves some kind of exercises there. Stay there, but doing some movement.
And this is why I pointed out this plane, the Spark in the Machine by David Noel, how science of acupuncture explains the mystery of Western medicine. Because he showed that with the meridians, we can explain the growth of epigenetic growth, like this problem that always Gregory Bateson was also talking about. How do the cells know how to arrange themselves in order to make up organs and to make up a complete body? And the answer is the meridian system, and the meridian system is nothing more than the stream of cell fluid that builds up the cells.
Meridian is the word. Okay.
Lucas.
And this is so you can, with the meridian flow, this is also why the meridian flow in all charts is a little bit different, because the flow of the meridian is not in the structure, but it is in the flow of the cell fluid that regenerates that structure. And so it might be sometimes a little bit here, because like all natural flows of streams, they all change a little bit the way that the stream while they are flowing. And with this, I think it's much more easy to understand that we are not in a metaphor, but we are really in a cybernetical process that started when we were a single cell, which we have to continue how to redirect the energies in our body system in order to not go crazy with all this opportunity we have to go crazy.
Okay.
Lucas, question.
Yes.
My takeaway from your presentation is threefold. One is the difference between trivial and non-trivial.
Yes.
And the question is, what's the architecture of trivial and non-trivial? That's a task I see.
Yes.
For what you're trying to do, number one.
Yes.
Number two is the ability to see vicious versus virtuous interactions.
Yes.
So it's like a rules of the road. You drive on the right side, the left side, but you sort of standardize it. You
Yes.
don't do as in Nigeria, they had trucks change over it one day and cars the next, that type of stuff.
Yes.
So your task is what's the architecture of interactions and patterns that produce
Yes.
the vicious cycle,
Yes.
architecture of patterns of vicious versus virtuous interactions. So you need a rules of the road, I would say.
Yes. May I briefly respond, because I forgot this I had so many things in my mind, so I forgot this as an answer to your question before also, where there's a clear rule. So the clear rule that we have reversed in our evolution is that till a couple of thousands of years ago, we always had to conserve energy and think about doing less movement. Because we're not clear in the food supply and the organization was a little bit unstable. Now it changes, that we have to think, how can we move in a meaningful manner, that it keeps being meaningful for the rest of our lives in order to stay alive and healthy. And we have to, whenever we encounter an opportunity to reduce movement, like doing an online conference, for every of these opportunities, we have to develop a conscious practice of mindfulness that we say, okay, I'm doing not movement here. It's a good thing because now I have this free time, that a little bit of this free time I conserve because we did not meet at the conference. I have to put in again into doing meaningful movement practice. I have to.
Lucas,
yes.
Question. My third point is really,
yes.
We need more rigor here. And by rigor, I mean like in dance notation, it's
yes.
called Laban notation, which takes every movement of an Indonesian girl learning and then developing the body memory of that particular movement that says swirls, etc. So until you start getting into the rigor of actually getting a Laban notation, for my two previous points about vicious versus virtuous, or the ability to look at trivial and non-trivial movements.
Yes.
So you need to be looking at the revolution and repetition that's necessary for living.
Yes. Yes.
The repetition is the identity. The revolution is evolutionary aspects.
Yes. Yes.
And that's what we should be looking towards in terms of modalities of change that enable a different form of movement versus a repetition. Because why is repetition good or bad? Repetition keeps you alive.
Yes,
Repetition
exactly.
also divorces you from the environment that changes its logic, and it'll kick you off the zone of fitness.
Yes. And another, sitting. As we talk about repetition, a very important movement that can kill us and is killing us is sitting. It's like if you sit too long, it's like smoking a pack of cigarettes. Exactly what you say. We have to accept that sitting, for example, is a movement, but this is something that has to do with education. That sitting is a movement, and it's so wonderful how Jason is repositioning his sitting, becoming aware of where he is in time and space, and being this autopoietic body system. And we have to practice rigorous routines. And this is what the Chinese and Taiwanese, I think they do it much better than the European and then the Americans, that they understand, for example, in how we regulate our sitting behavior, our looking behavior. Because a wonderful example is in China, there's many schools, every 2 hours, everyone has to stop watching the smartphone and computer and has to look in the horizon. And this is a rule. You have to do it. And why do they have to do it? Because looking at near distances so often produces too many short-sighted and blind people. And so the government made an overall rule that every 2 hours, everyone has to stop because they don't want to pay for people becoming blind. This is a very wonderful example where this rigor is already applied, and we should create something which is a little bit more democratic, because otherwise the Communist Party solution of one central government who says, this is how you sit, this is how you look, this is how you speak, will be the solution we need to survive in some manner. Because when we calculate that the sitting and the looking is a problem, then at some point we have to intervene, and we will intervene. Better now
So the first reform we need to do is to everybody switch to a movable chair like this.
Yes.
So throughout your coach and get a movable chair.
Yes.
Okay, I think we need to go to our second speaker, Namrata.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you.